give a fuck.
Are you sure?
I just don't give a fuck.
Presenting The Art of Not Giving a Fuck with Garrett John.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Art of NGF podcast. Tonight we have a very special guest, Mr. J. Allen Hood, otherwise known as Jeff. It's great to meet you, Jeff, and I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Nice to meet you, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, no problem. So I'll tell the story quick of how we ended up at this point, and then we'll have you launch into some stuff about your book. So I had seen a post by Mark Joyner online, who some of you might know from listening to the episode of The Art of NGF with him. And he had posted about a book, Conduct Becoming a Man, the Conduct Becoming a Man handbook on how to behave and why. And it immediately caught my attention. And then I was even more joyous when I clicked over to buy it and found out they were giving it away for free on Amazon. So I was one of the lucky few who got that, and I cranked through the book really quickly, and I enjoyed it very much. It filled in a lot of blanks for me. Even though I'm 41 and the book is aimed at younger men, I think anyone can get a lot out of it. So, and what little I know about you is that you grew up without the presence of a father figure. So my first question is, how did you end up being the guy who wrote this book? What did it take? What did you go through? What was the process? How did this occur?
I think a big thing is, I wouldn't say I had an overbearing mother, but I had a mother who, from up until maybe I was about 12 years old, who was very interested in putting me in dance and theater and all sorts of things like that. So when my balls dropped, I started to question, what I was doing. Not that I didn't enjoy it, but was there more? I didn't really see myself as being the next Fred Astaire. Mm-hmm. So that kind of caused me to look around and go, okay, how much of what I'm doing is because I want to do it, and how much of it is because I've kind of been put in there, not maliciously, but to pursue somebody else's idea of what my life should be. And so, it got the snap back feature, right, where I took it to the opposite extreme, and part of that may have been trying to compensate for doing things that were feminine,
Sure.
So I got into the punk rock scene. That's actually where I met Mark Joyner, by the way.
Oh, great. Okay. And where was it you grew up?
Reno, Nevada.
In Reno, Nevada. So, okay.
Yeah, we knew each other in high school. We didn't go to the same high school, but it was that era.
Ah, excellent.
So I did that and skirted with potential disaster a few times, but managed to escape relatively unscathed. And the wanderlust still wasn't satisfied, so I joined the Army.
Oh, okay. Now that's an interesting transition, because I know I was into punk rock for a while as well in my youth, and I know that it was not that's not an exactly smooth transition from punk rock into the military. Would you say?
No, it's a little bit of a wake-up call, but I think it's a good one, because there's that whole fight the system, and you know what I mean? You're being a rebel sometimes just for the sake of being a rebel, not without actually any forethought into it. You're just not happy with your life or the system or whatever, so you're just lashing out.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a big wake-up call when you join the Army. So, and another interesting tidbit is I had lost touch with Mark for years prior to that. And then I actually ran into him at language school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. We hadn't seen each other, and I actually saw him across this quad area where we formed up every morning.
That was part of the military training, or separate?
Part of the military training.
Oh, okay, excellent. Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, both he and I went through Defense Language Institute. I probably shouldn't talk too much about him. I'll leave that.
Sure. Yeah, I understand. So then you ended up spending quite a while in the Army then, yeah?
Yeah, 7 years. So the area that I was involved with was predominantly Pacific Command. So I went to Thailand and Cambodia quite a bit.
Wow.
So during the last 5 years, we were doing some landmine awareness and unexploded ordnance awareness.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's fascinating.
So yeah, I spent quite a lot of time away from home, which eventually had a negative impact on my marriage at the time, but you'll have that.
Did it make it? Did it survive or no?
No, it did not.
It did not survive. Okay, I'm
No.
sorry to hear that, but I understand.
Well, yeah.
Now, do you feel like a lot of the material that you developed into the book came from your military training as well?
Yeah, I think a ton of it did. You know, you have your preconceived notions of what the world is, you know, and then they're backed up by whatever you're encountering every day. So if you're punk rock, you know, living in that scene, you're learning some things, obviously what you think is true and what isn't, and then you get into a completely different environment. And then where the stakes are generally higher, you know, not to say you can't get in a life or death situation in the punk rock scene, but in the Army, you can run into them pretty frequently.
Right.
And there's not a whole lot of room for speculative and, you know, let's try these new things out. And, you know what I mean? Just kind of exploring your druthers, you know, when it's very focused on you need to do what you need to do.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot of room for freedom of expression and things like that. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you learn to become pragmatic, you know, in your efforts.
Right. That's very interesting. So, well, one of the sections of the book that caught my eye or piqued my interest right away was your take on fighting. And I know in the current culture, it's almost universally thought of as a negative thing to ever fight, no matter what the circumstances are.
Right.
And obviously, in your book, your take on it is different. And I found it refreshing and actually agree with you on that. But it was interesting to actually have to unpack that and think about it a little bit. Where did the inspiration for that come from?
You know, it's interesting. I've had a number of buddies, you know, because like you said, it's pretty prevalent now that society frowns upon it at a minimum.
Yeah.
You know, so I've had a lot of buddies that have never actually been in a fight, and they were over the years, and they've always been asked me about, you know, what's it like. And I'm by no means I'm no master fighter. You certainly, some MMA guy could talk to this more. I'm talking about just fist fights on the street.
Yeah.
They've asked me, you know, what it was like and the psychology of it. It made me really try to analyze it internally and go, okay, what goes on here? You know, so I could explain it to them. And, you know, the biggest thing is fear, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, I had one friend of mine in the Army that I spent a fair amount we had a couple conversations about it, and I basically gave him my wisdom at the time, which was most of the time, if you just go for it, you'll do fine. You know, it's the fear of you don't want to do it, you know, and then the other person manipulating you to kind of hype that fear up and make you quit or whatever. And what was surprising, I lost touch with him for about a year or so. He was stationed. He got his duty station changed. And when I ran into him again, he told me that he was 11-1. And I was like, well, I didn't mean go out and fight everyone you meet. Jeez. But yeah, once the cork came off of that, he was swinging at the drop of a hat. But yeah, I mean, I think, you know, he was pretty invigorated by it. Now, obviously, you don't want to take it to some extreme where you're just looking for fights. You know, you can wind up in jail pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly. But you can hurt yourself or other people and then be paying for it.
But you have to stand up for yourself. And there are certainly people that play that game, and they'll get you to back down to get whatever it is they want out of you, whether it's just subjugating you for their ego or not. And I think men have to understand that and, you know that game too can play. Yeah,
totally. It made me remember the bullying chapter and the fighting chapter. It made me remember a time when I was a kid. There was another kid up the street. I eventually became friends with him, which is kind of funny. I think that might even be common in these situations, but he had always been bullying and just picking on me or kick me, punch and stuff like that, but never a full-on fight. And then my mom one day just said, "Oh, just hit him once, just hit him back once, and it'll be done." And I didn't believe it. I was terrified of the kid. He was older and bigger, but then just went out and did it. And I remember it was like the most crazy feeling. Oh, the call dropped there for a second.
Yeah,
Looks like it's
I
still
saw that.
recording. Okay, popped
Okay.
right back up. Should keep going. So yeah. Anyway, I was saying, yeah, I just remember just boiling over with fear. It was insane, and then reaching up and punching the kid in the face, and then I just ran home. I didn't even stop to see what happened or if he was chasing me or anything. But I turned around
Right.
and ran home, and then nothing ever happened again. The kid never bullied again, and he started being friendly, and then
Yeah.
and everything was okay. But that ended it. Just one time standing up completely.
Yeah, it's the psychology of that. People do bully for various reasons. I talk about that in the book a lot, but especially when it comes to kids, they're trying to fulfill where they fit, on the pecking order, or there's obviously a hole in that person when they start doing that.
Yeah.
And they think somehow bullying another is going to get that hole filled.
Right.
But if people push back, it's surprising how quickly they'll change targets. It's not like somebody just has a rampant hatred for you and that's why they're bullying you. That's not what's behind it.
Yeah, exactly.
So normally, if they can't get that hole filled real quick, they'll move right on to someone that can.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing. It's good that there's some voice out there. This is one of the few places I've seen it. Maybe there's some on some of the men-friendly websites and stuff, but it's really not a common view anymore. It's certainly not promoted in school or anything like that.
Yeah, I think this ties into a lot of different things where people have this ideal world that they want to exist. And that's certainly fine, and you should certainly strive for that. But to be delusional about reality is, an issue. People fighting and bullying and all that stuff, that's part of human nature. It's not necessarily good, but you can't wish it away.
Yeah.
I think you need to look at it and confront it, and not with some sort of rose-colored glasses. I don't think you accomplish much doing that.
Yeah, no, I don't think so either. It just doesn't, you're not connected with what's actually going on. So that's always doing yourself and everyone else who's relying on you a disservice, I think.
Yeah, especially when it does eventually snap back, being unrealistic about things in life, and which is, I think, socially right now, we're going through a lot of that.
Yeah.
In the end, that you can't ignore it forever. It'll come back at you.
Yeah, exactly. So I also remember a little bit about the loneliness, the depression sections. Did that come from some of your own experience? Was that the military or more when you were a young man back in Reno?
Mostly when I was young. There are times, obviously, in the military where you feel pretty alone, but normally you have a lot of your buddies around you, so it wasn't too much of that then. But growing up, my mother worked swing shift. I had a single parent, obviously. And so I didn't see her for days at a time, because she'd be gone when I'd come home from school. So I did a lot of reading, and back then, obviously, there wasn't the social media, we have now. You had 3 TV channels, and unless you wanted to watch a lot of Bob Newhart, a lot of times, you're idle unless you're reading.
Right.
Especially if you're trapped in the house, if you're 12 or something like that, it's not like you can go out and live it up on the town.
Right. So. Yeah. It's very similar to how I grew up. I'm actually very thankful for that now, though, that there wasn't an internet, and that, I think kids are getting a disservice by not being forced to learn to play outside, read a lot, go out and learn and explore and climb trees and do different things. Not that they don't do it at all, but I can't imagine what it would be like to grow up thinking the internet has always been around and that it'll always be around. It's a totally bizarre concept to me, so I'm very grateful to have grown up without it.
Yeah, and who knows what would have happened. I mean, if video games were as good then as they are now and as prevalent, I doubt I would have read much. I probably just would have sat down and gamed every single day.
Right.
When I got home from school, and would have missed out on a lot of opportunities to educate myself.
Yeah, I feel the same way. That's a very good point.
I mean, the one thing I do think is good is there's a lot of good YouTube content. So I think, kids that are naturally curious, when they go home, they can, I think you're better off watching, YouTube stuff, especially if it's educational, like how to do crafts or things like that, versus exclusively playing games.
Oh there's some amazing stuff on YouTube. Really, if you have just a bit of, like you said, curiosity and some passion to learn something. Oh my God!
Yeah, it's
become a
crazy.
master.
It'll be interesting to see what results from it 5 or 10 years from now, because I mean, people can educate themselves to a level that was unheard of. Before you'd have to live in a library, and a big one, to be able to get what you have now at your fingertips. So I think the intellectually curious folks are going to be pretty knowledge packed 5 or 10 years from now.
Yeah, it's amazing because they can surpass most college students in a much shorter time, because in college, for example, not all, but most courses are drawn out longer than they need to be. Sometimes even detrimental to learning the subject matter. Like that Parkinson's law, the task will expand to fit as much time as you allow for it.
Uh-huh.
Have a whole semester to learn something relatively simple. Someone else can be doing the same on YouTube and have a much greater education in a much shorter time. And I think the workforce is changing in a way where it's not as dependent on the college degree, but more dependent on merit and aptitude for certain skills and abilities. If you can demonstrate those, sometimes they don't even take a look to see if you have a degree or not. They're just looking for, if you show up and can do the job, then you're in there.
Yeah, especially if you're in a business that's pragmatic.
Yeah.
I'm actually director of operations for a mid-sized company. Mm-hmm. And I look for basically intelligence and work ethic. Everything else after that is, and I even tell the folks that do the interviews for me that I don't particularly care. Even experience to some point. I don't, depending on the role they're moving into, most stuff can be trained. An intelligent person can be trained on the basics of their job in weeks. Obviously, it depends on what you're going after, but in the work that I'm in. So I don't particularly care to hire guys with experience. If they happen to be also intelligent and have a great work ethic, all the better. But if I had to choose 2 out of 3, I'm picking intelligence and work ethic over experience and intelligence, or experience and work ethic. Anyway.
Right. Yeah, I think that's very good. And historically, I'm still very interested in the apprentice model. My dad is an electrician. His dad was an electrician, and he inherited the whole business. I'm not sure if it was a van full of tools and then a list of happy clients and a reputation, basically. But yeah, he inherited that business and then did it his whole life, and then taught me and taught his other son how to do a lot of it. I decided not to do that business, but I could have gone into it relatively easy with that training, and it was just done on the job. And that's a particular industry where the apprentice model fits, but I think there's a lot of industries. I know Mark, the guy we mentioned, has apprenticed people into business. A lot of people that are in business never got educated formally in it.
Yeah. Trial and error.
Yeah. And I would like to see more of a return to the apprentice model, where you show some desire and work ethic, and then someone takes you under their wing and is able to.
Yeah, apprenticeshiping, and that kind of segues into mentoring. Mm-hmm. when you identify somebody that you're working with, that you're like, what, this person's got a pretty good skill set, or good traits, and you just kind of encourage them and poke them in the right direction a few times, get them on a good path. Especially when you're working in blue collar, let's say, where people aren't carrying around a sheepskin that's going to get them somewhere, open a door or whatever. Mm-hmm. You can find a surprising number of people if you look around that you're like, this person's a stud in the making right here, and they can come from any background. And then if you mentor them a little bit, I mean, you can change people's lives to where, I'm friends with people that I worked with 10 years ago, and I know that their path is much different than it would have been if somebody hadn't, basically said, hey, you're a stud. Let me open a few doors for you. And then, they're off on a tear after that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Because they have the right traits.
And you said you think that someone can learn those traits, or they have to already have them?
Well, that's an interesting question. Obviously, I don't believe in the tabula rasa theory where people are blank slates. You know, I think there's certain things that are innate, genetic memory or whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
But the rest is, you know, it's the nature versus nurture thing. I think based on your experiences, they're going to change who you are. And some people at 18, 19 have been through things and are naturally predispositioned to have a certain intelligence or curiosity or what have you.
Right.
So, but I do, you know, that doesn't apply across the board. You know, I think there are certain folks that just aren't predisposed to being able to do things well, whether that's social interaction or physical activities or what have you. You know, so you can't just mentor any dude you see on the street and think you're gonna, you know, turn him into a stud.
Right. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And it might be a waste of effort for both people in that case too. So it is good to be able to discern.
I mean, you know, when you're in a funk, if you are lucky enough to be in a position where you can evaluate, you know, 50 people, let's say, for various jobs within an organization, you can certainly see that some are going to be better suited towards certain positions than others. You know, and if you take the wrong guy and if you take a guy who's quiet and has, you know, doesn't have real great social skills and try to make them into a salesman, well, you probably just did both of you a disservice.
Right.
You know, because that person they can certainly become better at something like that, but innately they don't have a tool set that's predisposed towards being good at that.
Yeah. So what about work ethic? You think that's something a person can learn if they weren't inculcated with it in their childhood?
I think a lot of folks can learn it. You know, I think part of it is because it isn't, that's interesting because the next book I'm going to write is actually about work ethic.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I think a lot of people aren't taught that because of the way society has kind of shifted over the last 20 years. You know, the emphasis on that and work that has its own reward, right? Which Chinese culture, you know, historically kind of went on and on about that work has its own value, regardless of what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's doing something well and getting a reward out of that, you know, regardless of the task. You know, I don't think that society is really touching on that anymore. So you'd be surprised a lot of the younger guys, if somebody sits down and just talks to them straight about it, you know, and explains it to them and just goes, hey, there's value in this. You know, it's not like I'm getting over on you or the man's forcing you to do something and, you know, where you've got to do everything you can to not be squozened by somebody, you know, which is kind of the attitude a lot of folks seem to have nowadays.
Yeah.
And that's the wrong attitude, you know, and surprisingly, this whole us versus them thing, I mean, in management, I think most people aren't trying to squeeze anybody. You know, it's pragmatic need to get something done. Right. You know, and it has nothing to do with your personality or, you know, that somebody's trying to get one over on you. And I think if you actually talk to some people and have that kind of conversation with them, you can impact a change in them.
Yeah.
But, you know, obviously the person doing that has to not only talk the talk, they need to walk the walk, you know, so when they see that guy, what he said and what he did are the same things, you know, then they're like, okay, maybe there's something to this.
Were there any examples in your life that you remember that stand out, like people that had an exemplary work ethic that exhibited that kind of trait?
Yeah, I worked for a guy in an industry who, after I got out of the Army, who was also prior Army in Vietnam, you know, 20 years older than me. And the guy's a stud. And he certainly did it old school, you know, and it's, you know, when you watch a guy like that, and I mean, what he demanded of you, he gave himself. So, you know, that's one thing is, like I mentioned a second ago, anybody can talk, right? And sound great and parrot things that, you know, that everyone wants to hear. But seeing that guy actually get down in there and do it, you know, that's when you earn respect and go, okay, now maybe there's something to what he's saying.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Well, that's one it took me quite a while to learn. And for my own lessons in that regard. It was simply doing things that I shouldn't have been doing and types of jobs I shouldn't have been doing that was leading me to not have the work ethic. I didn't even think someone was trying to put one over on me. I just felt like
Just no interest in it, or
I had just zero interest. I would still do the work, but just felt miserable and drained. But then once I started doing business, I found I could do 18 hours or 20 hours, just go all the way through the night when I was learning to do websites and doing different things like that. When I was able to make money on my own, even if the 20 hours didn't pay right away or paid nothing,
right,
and then it went down the road, it didn't even matter. It was just that it was fun and I felt driven to do it. So I think that's part of the equation as well. But I do see how a work ethic in all the situations I was in would have served me better than a bad attitude. And that's one thing I see in the book as well. That had I had a good attitude, I might have been able to find those other opportunities a lot sooner to do things I did like to do and be noticed by people in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
that's interesting.
Yeah, it's really because of various teachers and different mentors, whether accidental or deliberate in my life, that I kind of learned that along the way. But thank God that I did.
I think that personal interaction has a lot to do. I mean, especially someone that's intellectually curious, you can read a bunch of stuff and watch a bunch of things, but until you deal with another person on a face-to-face basis and see somebody exhibit that stuff, that's what I think really what'll sink it in.
Yeah, definitely.
You can entertain something and kick it around in your mind and go, you know what, that makes a lot of sense. But until you actually, it gets cemented when you meet somebody that's doing it and you're like, oh man, that does work. I really should do that.
Right. Yeah. It's a wonderful life changer. I know, to finally know that taking responsibility for your own life is actually a good thing. Recognizing that that if you don't, someone else will be filling that gap for you.
No, and I think, that's a problem. I'm sure it's been a problem throughout history, but I think right now it's easy to see that there are a lot of people just kind of bouncing down the river.
Yeah.
They're not really directing anything. And I don't know if it's because they feel powerless to do so, or they just haven't thought about it. They're staying entertained enough where it's not an issue they feel they need to address. But I think you can end up somewhere you never really wanted to be if you let everything just kind of bounce along until you get stuck on some bank somewhere and you're like, okay, I guess this is where I'm at.
Yeah.
You look back on your life and go, wow, maybe I should have knuckled down a few times or actually made a conscious decision to pursue something.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's fascinating because the tools that are available now, I mean, I think there's the potential for upward mobility, not just in the US, where I think it's the highest in all of the world. I think the upward mobility in the US is the easiest. If you just do the right thing, even some of the time, it's definitely possible to rise in your life and from one class to another.
Yeah.
No matter what color, no matter what gender, any of that stuff now. And the tools are there to be able to do it. Like you said, YouTube alone would get you a long way. Even on social skills, you can practice those. I mean, everything is there for the taking. And yet, what do you think it is? What happened in society? Because there was a time before where people had to work their asses off and not necessarily with the promise of any kind of upward mobility, but just to keep everything together to make the ends meet.
Yeah. You know what? This is an interesting one. Kind of segues into what's going on in society these days. A lot of this is that us versus them mentality, where, I think there's, whether it's by design or just happenstance, people are trying to create this feeling, I think, with a lot of people that it's like the other people aren't going to give you an opportunity, right? So why try? Why knuckle down? Why do anything? Everything's against you. And they're disenfranchising people with that kind of nonsense.
Yeah.
If you tell somebody, especially, this is one thing that kind of gets under my craw, as it were. If you're talking to young people and you tell them all the things that are bad in life and all the people that are going against them, and that basically no one's going to give you a hand, there's nothing you can do to better your situation. Well, you took the wind out of that person's sails. Now all they're going to do is just thrive on bitterness and, how they're not getting anywhere because everyone else is trying to hold them back and all that, where the opposite is what you want to do. and just go, look, there are challenges in life, but if you do start rowing the boat, you can get somewhere. And maybe there is a guy somewhere who's not going to give you an opportunity because he doesn't like you for whatever bizarre reason. But that's not the norm. The norm is most people, if you kick ass, will go, hey, well, I want this guy around. I want him on my team. But a lot of society seems to be just not doing the very opposite of that. This, especially with people doing all this race relation, the racial stuff and the gender stuff, just trying to pit each other against you. It just makes no sense to me. And I can't even imagine why someone would try to instill that in a young person. Right. Basically just disenfranchise that person going forward. Just go, well, you can try, but more than likely everyone's against you and the other gender hates you and all the other races are going to try and hold you down. It's like, well, there you go.
And all that stuff is learned. It's amazing because you'd never see a group of kids unless they learned it or mimicking it from their parents or something they saw. Like you said, they've been taught it or they learned it by accident. Then no group of kids that I remember ever seeing, there was not racism going on or some kind of sexism happening. There was kids sometimes being mean to each other, sometimes being cool, but it was never about any traits like that. It was just kids were hanging out and having fun with each other. Didn't matter the color, didn't matter any of that till we got older. And then somehow that stuff became important to some of them. And it's not like inborn. We are not raised with a hate for somebody of a gender or of a color. It's definitely not there inborn.
Yeah, I know. I certainly will recognize that back in the old-timey days, let's say in the 50s, 60s, it was prevalent. But I think as, people our age, I think it really, and I'm sure it depends on where you grew up. Did you grow up on the West Coast?
I grew up in Minnesota.
Did you?
Outside Minneapolis, yeah.
Yeah, I saw the times that I've spent on the East Coast, I saw more of it, than I ever saw here in the West. But over the years, it's certainly diminished to the point where it became almost a non-issue, unless somebody wanted to make it into one. And obviously in the Army, there's only one color. So you didn't deal with almost any of it there. But yeah, to make it the keystone of your character is bizarre to me.
Yeah, it's intense. And like you said, teaching kids that before they've ever had any kind of bad experience. And it's possible if a kid does have an experience of racism or sexism, you can still tell them, hey, this isn't even about you can explain to them, like in your chapter about bullying, hey, this person isn't even really about your skin, your personality, or you at all. It's about that other person having that hole that they haven't filled, and they're trying to fill it with that. And they've put some color or gender over the top of their general hate or misery.
Yeah, to try and explain their failing or whatever it is that they're frustrated about in life.
Right, exactly. So it's still not even a racial issue on that level. It's an issue of how people are actually treating each other. And if it's taught in that way, if the kids grow up knowing, okay, that's not about you, don't worry about it. But if you tell the kid, yeah, the black people are going to always hate you, so look out for them. I mean, then you walk around with that in your mind. It's how you react to everything. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is.
And that's fascinating too. It's something that I think that a lot of people don't know is what you said about the Army, that there's only one color. There's no color in the Army. So go into that a little bit more. How did you become aware of that?
Well, I think one of the part of what we're seeing a lot of nowadays, if you're pragmatic, you can't deal with nonsense like that. Mm-hmm. And the Army has to be pragmatic. So you need to get stuff done. So there's no, you have to base people on their competence. You can't make a judgment that's based on some, you don't like the color underwear the guy wears or what, it has nothing to do with it. Mm-hmm. You have to deal with people basically on what they produce. And I think in historical man world, that was always the case. I'm sure there were always people that didn't like redheads and some other things like that. But when it came time to hunt the mastodon, you had to put that aside.
Yeah.
That's nonsense. That's really just, you have to have enough free time to really start conjuring up bullshit like that. In a pragmatic situation, there's no room for it.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the way the Army works. And I think if you deal with that, especially when you're trying to accomplish a task or doing something that's important, people put that aside.
Yeah.
Even if they're carrying a lot of it, the more dire the task, people quickly realize that is non-essential.
Right.
Not only is it non-essential, it's detrimental.
Yeah.
But if you've got idle hands, you can certainly start entertaining that stuff, not to your benefit.
No.
But I think it's people's nature; they will do that. And if you look at, on a macro scale, I think we see a lot of this in society. Society's gotten so basically great that a lot of people are almost idle all the time. So it's just, they just drum up a bunch of nonsense that they, gives them where they feel like there's some involvement, that they're making a difference, or they're part of a movement or something like that, because there's a lack of actual things they need to be doing.
Right.
So they just start exploring things to, try to give themselves meaning in some way.
Right. And there might even be, it might rise from a sense of guilt over not understanding why they have what they have, why they have it so good, and not have to do anything to receive it, at least in the beginning. And
because they didn't learn any lessons on their path. They just showed up somewhere, so they're trying to figure it out, and often without any sort of mentorship or guidance from anybody. So the first person that starts, whispering a sweet tune in their ear, they're like, oh, okay, I guess we'll do this.
Right.
Whereas somebody who got there on the hard path, they learned those lessons along the way. So I think, back in any sort of environment where people have had to struggle to get where they are, they arrive there with some wisdom in tow versus, somebody being handed something and just going, now figure out what you're going to do with all your free time.
Right. Yeah, I think it's good for people to have an adventure. I know something I heard Jesse Lee Peterson saying one time was just, when you turn 18, get the hell out of your parents' house. Doesn't matter if you have money, doesn't matter if you have the means to do it. Just get out and have an adventure and go find a way to get a place and get your life together, no matter what you have to do it. And he described it back in his time, which was a while back, that in his childhood, that it was just known when he was growing up that when you turn 18, you're out. There was no other option. There wasn't anything to choose from. It was just that when you turn 18, then you go. And now when you say that to people, and a lot of kids are starting to stay at home longer, are taught that it's a lot harder now, the recession, or they repeat the talking points from the media, but they haven't even developed any experience to know what the hell a recession even means. There's tons of other people out there who make more money during a recession.
Absolutely.
You can always see someone that needs help doing something and then help them do it. I mean, that's the cornerstone of every business, essentially, is that complexified. But
I think that whole kids staying with their parents, when they're into their 30s, I'm sure there are certain situations where it makes perfect sense. But there are a lot of situations where, I mean, if no one's pushing you out of the nest, why are you going to leave?
right.
So then you just delay the maturing of that person, and it's not to their benefit. I mean, if a 35-year-old gets in any sort of competitive situation in industry or something with somebody who have been living on their own since they're 16, that 16, the one person is probably going to have a lot more gumption and drive and wisdom than the person who's just been chilling. Nothing is required of them, and I think they never probably have difficulty reaching fulfillment as well.
Right. And that leaves a gap, I think, for a man, probably for a woman too. I'm not a woman, so I don't know. But I know that if you end up staying at the parents' house for too long, that it definitely would leave some sort of, it would develop over time some sense of inferiority that you'd have to be masking with something else. I mean, and making the excuse, this really makes people victims. If and I hear this from a lot of clients I've worked with, they think they always think they need these exactly right circumstances that are going to appear magically in the future in order to make a change, in order to move out, or in order to make money, or in order to quit a job and try a new one.
Right.
Now, if they have a real plan and they see, okay, in 6 months, if I stay at this job, then I can quit and do this and this, that's one situation. That's fine. You're actually taking action toward it in a way that's good and maybe more secure. But if you don't have that, and that's not going to lead to that, I almost favor telling a person, just make the change, even if it's a disaster, and then deal with the disaster. And in dealing with the disaster, that's where the right circumstances actually are.
Yeah, but it's a lot easier to tell yourself a bunch of bullshit, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. Definitely.
No, I think that to some extent, I think we all fall into that trap, where we're waiting for the stars to align before we'll finally, take that risk, and that's just a good way to delay ever taking the risk. You can come up with a million excuses why, you haven't done something. But the reality is, I think people need to really look at why they're not moving, and why they're not making those efforts, and be realistic in that you're bullshitting yourself. I think that's a big thing. Introspection, I think, is missing from a lot of folks. They want to, and everybody wants to be happy, sure, but you don't want to delude yourself, and just go, well, this and that, and this, make up different scenarios, and that's why things are the way they are. When in reality, you need to take a hard look at yourself and just go, okay, am I full of shit here? Am I not doing something? Is that a bullshit excuse that I'm using?
There's a lot of guys I've met who they still do live at home, the occasional client, and then guys I just meet out in the world, and they still live at their parents' house. And again, whether that's by necessity or not, that's fine. It's up for question in each situation.
Sure.
But
yeah,
but a lot of them I've met are spending all their time learning how to do what I think is mostly bullshit, the pickup stuff, which is just, they're learning that. And I'm like, you're going to the mall every day or every weekend, or up to the bars. And where are you going to take this woman? Are you going to take her to mom's house? And are you going to make her a meal, or is mom going to make that meal? Like, how does that even work? They haven't thought it through. And I don't know how that's a great place to look, where they can stop bullshitting themselves immediately.
I met a guy who was talking to me and basically asked if I was a proponent of any of that because he used it all or whatever. And because I don't have a problem generally finding a girlfriend.
Sure.
So he had noted that. And I was like, no, I don't do any of that stuff. And, it's funny because, it certainly seems to work for some people on a certain extent. Mm-hmm. But if you're just like actually a dude and you have a job and a place to live and you're not violent and abusive and, you're decent shape, you're good.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't need to do any weird, manipulations. And in the end, that stuff, it comes out in the wash. If you got some girl by duplicitous methods, you played some game with, on them and then they fell for it. How's that going to pan out for you in the long term?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't know. And if they think that's going to lead to a full life, love exists for real. It's not just having sex, so you're never going to get that other side by doing that pickup artist stuff.
Right. It kind of continues what I call the manipulated life. I see two ways of life, like you mentioned before, victim or adventurer. And that doesn't mean you're rock climbing, mountain climbing. You can, but a victim could be climbing mountains too. But it's not about the outside of life as much as it is on the inside. You can be an adventurer in a wheelchair in an office all day. It's about how you approach everything and never making yourself a victim. But yeah, I think a lot of the pickup stuff leads to what I call the manipulated life, and where you're manipulating other people, but then it sends this insidious message to yourself, maybe unconsciously. I'm not good enough as I am to be able for someone to love me, but when I do this trick, then they like me.
Yeah, and I think when people start down a road like that, they really can't be introspective anymore. If you've done stuff that's basically immoral, or you've brought something like that into as one of your habits, right. You can't realistically be introspective. you have to just pretend that doesn't exist. Because if you sit down and look at yourself and just go, okay, I guess I'm a piece of shit, that no one's going to do that. So then they just stop and just start drinking their own Kool-Aid. And then, 10, 20 years from that, what kind of person does that become?
Right.
And maybe that's a reason people aren't introspective. Maybe that's just they don't really want to see what's going on inside there because they'd be too disappointed.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And maybe that's a key to introspection for people listening. To begin it is to also drop I think that the self-judgment and having the opinions about yourself, once you've begun to be introspective, I think it strays back into evil or immoral to start having harsh judgments of yourself. If you're actually looking, striving to make yourself better, then harsh judgments of yourself don't really have a place there. You can say, okay, that wasn't good. You can use discernment, but I don't think calling yourself a piece of shit or thinking that you're a total loser really helps. I think it just continues the cycle.
Yeah, I don't think you can't albatross yourself. You know what I mean? You can't basically go, man, I'm so bad, that where you take the wind out of your own sails.
Yeah.
But I think you can be realistic and just go, well, what I did there, that was pretty shitty. You have to go, that's not my nature though. I can not do that in the future.
Right, exactly.
And I think that way you can kind of empower yourself. And if it matters to you, your odds of doing it go way up. But if you don't even really look at what matters to you, then, you're back to that bouncing along the river thing, seeing what bank you end up on.
Right. And there's a lot of shitty banks to end up on too. It's not, not pretty out there.
And then you'll have to look back on your journey and then you've got two options, right? To be introspective and go, man, I really, my lack of effort or my bad decision-making put me here.
Right.
Or you can not do that and just blame society and blame circumstance and do all that.
And then in some ways, I think what's fascinating about that is if you make your way long enough through that introspective process, and you mentioned humility in the book, I think that's an amazing chapter as well, by the way, that deep sense of humility and introspection has an effect of redeeming the past as well. Not it may be in a biblical sense, but not in a sense of after you die or some force in the sky doing it, but it happens in the here and now, that you can look back and have such strength and stability in the present that then everything that led up to that gets cleansed in some way. Not that you didn't do the stupid things or that they didn't hurt people, but that you can look back and see, okay, I was out of control. I couldn't help it. And that leads to the sense of humility that would allow a deep understanding of other people and being able to forgive other people and not to take things personally or too heavily, even if someone is doing something against you.
Yeah, and I think that's a pretty powerful life lesson. I run into a lot of people that hate all their exes, right? That's like the most common people that anyone hates in their life. It's all their ex. If there's anyone that anyone hates, it's either a boss or their ex. And then if you get into a conversation with them about it shows the depth of their maturity, how they view their exes, and that is humility. If you look back on your life and just go, there's a reason I broke up with that person or they broke up with me, and more than likely you have not always been the hero. You have probably done things that caused somebody to break up with you or you hurt them or whatever. And if you're willing to take that in, then you can look at the behavior of somebody else, of a woman, let's say, who broke up with you, and you don't have to hate them. You can go, you know what, they made a mistake. They did whatever. They're, at that point in their life, they were going through something. And not to say that they're a stud, that person is awesome and, all is forgiven. But you don't have to carry this weird hate baggage about every person you've ever broken up with. It just makes no sense to me. I mean, you obviously liked them at some point.
Yeah, exactly.
So either your judgment is so horrible that you really probably shouldn't be trusted, or people fuck up.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's the end of it and whatever, but you don't have to carry around a weird hate anchor for the rest of your life about it.
No, it only hurts yourself, really. I mean, especially if you're not living around the person, don't have to deal with them. Even still, if you have to deal with them, then even better to let it go. But both ways is lighter and more free for the individual, for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, you're certainly hamstringing your future efforts if you're dragging something like that along.
Right. And yeah, how does that sound to your new girlfriend?
Yeah, no, anyone that's mature sees, I mean, that's a huge red flag for me when I was actively dating. I was like, oh, okay, yep, you've got some maturity issues. So,
Right. And you'll be on that list sooner or later, right?
yeah. I'll just be like, I'll cut to the chase and just leave now.
Yeah, exactly. There was a song line I heard that really startled me into realizing that quite a few years ago now, but it was something like, "Now I'm finally seeing that I was the one worth leaving."
Yeah.
Man, oh shit. And having to look back and reevaluate a lot of situations. Yeah.
Yeah, that's goes back to the introspection and all that. I think it's just so important, you know, and I've certainly been a party to a lot of my failed romances, you know. And I think the only way you get better is looking back and just going, well, you know, that's behavior I don't want to repeat. Or I can see where that was, you know, damaging or whatever. And if I want to have a successful relationship in the future, I need to not do that again.
Yeah. Well, and that's proof that you're actually learning and evolving when you feel that way. That feeling of like, oh man, did I do that yesterday?
Yeah.
If you can sit with it long enough, then it forces a learning. It's a beautiful thing. So I wanted to wind up with the last chapter in your book, love. So what is love to you? What do you think of it? We came up a little bit during the talk, but I want to hear more about what you think.
Well, that kind of segues back into, you know, a couple of things we've touched upon earlier. You know, I think all people, both genders, you know, are predisposed to having a bond pair, you know, with somebody else. I think that's evolutionarily ingrained into folks, right? So I think from a purely psychological perspective, you know, you can look at love that way. And then there's also the religious connotations as well. But I think love for a man, I think also men and women express love differently. And that, you know, gets into psychology, and I'm not a psychologist, so I've watched a lot of YouTube videos there. But I think men, you know, are the protector providers. And I think it's fulfilling on a hard to quantify level when you found the person that you want to do that for, to protect and provide for. And I, you know, I think it kind of trips some trigger that you can't quite put your finger on, but it provides you that feeling that you're doing it right. You know, so the more you do it, the more you kind of create your own feedback loop. And I think that's kind of the basis of what love is. You know, it's that feeling that fills you when you're doing the proper evolutionary thing. That's just a weird way to talk about it, isn't it?
No, I think that's good. I mean, it's different, and it's. I think people get confused, especially with like hypersexualization of society, which has been going on for a while now.
Yeah,
that's something I've had to fight through and to learn different habits. And almost everyone I've met has had to learn different habits around that, and that people they think that sexuality is love and emotionality even is love.
Right. And no, and you know, that goes back to the complete difference between men and women, you know, how they view sex in a different light. Yeah. You know, whereas men are primarily visual based, and, you know, they can, and I know a lot of people aren't going to want to hear this, but a lot of guys can have sex with a woman and not even particularly care for her. Yeah. It's a physical release or whatever it is. It's just kind of built into you. Whereas my understanding of most women don't feel that way. Yeah. You know, they want to have sex with somebody for other reasons. It's not just physical gratification. There's a lot more to it. Right. And so, you know, and I think as a guy, you need to be cognizant of that, because you can hurt people because of it. You know, I mean, if one person wants one thing out of a relationship and you want something entirely different, Well, you should make that clear.
Yeah.
Otherwise and especially if you knowingly manipulate that person to get your ends, that's immoral, obviously.
Yeah, definitely. And it doesn't do anyone any good. I think it diminishes the heart and the ability of the man to be able to actually love or recognize what that would even mean. And then it also hurts the women, and that may lead to other behaviors that don't really serve them. And it leads to a good point. I wanted to recommend also, before we go, recommend that anyone listening, if they're interested, should check out the book, The Conduct Becoming a Man. Even women. At first, I wondered if I would recommend it to women, but I think that there's so little education about these specific topics, even within families and even with good parents. They might not cover all those bases that are covered in that book. And so even a person who's doing relatively well, it would not hurt to read it and to brush up and to make those things more conscious and more aware in your life.
Who I'd like to have read it would be women that really hate men and think that they're evil. I mean, if they could read that with an open mind, I think it might be illuminating. Men certainly have bad behaviors, but at their core, I think most men are either like what I've described in the book or want to be.
Yeah.
And I don't think that makes them villains in any way. And that might be useful for some people that have no idea what a man is like. And even, a lot of men these days have no idea.
Right. Well, and for women to be able to stop going along with the guys who aren't real men and who aren't living up to those, at least some of those traits, or striving to. I think if women we can all take part in this evolution. If women stop going along with those guys, then those guys might be forced a little more quickly to do something about it.
Yeah, to modify their behavior.
Yeah, exactly.
I think a lot of women have just given up on men nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
They just think all men are pigs or whatever, and so they're like, man. They don't necessarily know that there are quite a few guys that are trying to be men in a positive manner. They're not just sexual villains out to and idiots. Even though there's a lot of them running around.
Yeah, definitely. And that's who gets the headlines, But I think, like I said, growing up in Minnesota, the vast majority of men and women that I met were good workers. They had a house. They had their life together, greater or less. More or less, they had their life together. They had things going on. Everybody went camping. There was always something fun to do. People out at the park. Things were nice growing up there almost all the time. Even though, of course, there were disasters or horrible things that people did to each other in the news. But it's really probably less, like a fraction of 1% of people are doing serious evil to each other.
Yeah.
And then the rest are some on a spectrum of basic goodness. For the most part, or there wouldn't even be a society. If we got up around 10 or 20% of people doing horrible things, the whole thing would fall apart. You wouldn't be able to drive anywhere without having a gun and a bulletproof vest if that was the numbers.
Yeah, and I think we are kind of suffering from a social entropy because because none of these positives are being pointed out and none of these things to aspire to, and it seems to all just be how everyone is in conflict with each other. I don't think that's I think that's going to drag at the seams. That's going to cause more fraying. And I think people need to encourage and say what you just said, is that the bulk of people are just trying to live their lives and be happy,
right.
And if you're going to set an example for them, why don't you talk about something? Let's talk about some positive things that people can strive for, even if it involves work on their part, but in the end, it provides a reward versus just disparaging everything and putting people at odds.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, to bring it back to the beginning, that work, doing that work is a reward in itself, like generosity, all those things. They're doing the work of introspection or doing good work on anything, whether it's a hobby or your job or a business, doing something really well, even if you're all alone in your garage. It's just probably one of the greatest feelings in life, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, to produce something, or even if it's an improvement in yourself, to produce, I think is kind of what's at the core of that. Whether it's you improving yourself to the point where you can recognize it and honestly know, okay, you know what, I'm better now, or I've accomplished that, or I handled that situation well, or you carved a bird or something, you know what I mean? And in the end, you can look back at it and just go, that was nothing. And now it's something. And I did it.
Yep. Yeah. Learning to cook. I mean, all the different things. It's great. A great sense of fulfillment. Well, hey, Jeff, this has been really fun, man. And I would definitely have you on again. When do you think are you working on the next book already?
Well, actually, I'm working on the audiobook version, and I'm no sound engineer, so it's taken me a while. But once I finish that and get that up, then I'll start working on the next book.
Okay, cool, man. Well, I think we're connected on social media and on email, so stay in touch. I'd be happy to talk with you again, or if I'm ever around in California, I'll look you up. But
well, actually, I'm in Las Vegas.
Oh, you're in Vegas now. Okay.
Yeah, which people surprisingly end up here quite a bit.
Ah, yeah. I haven't for many years. I did live in California for a while, but I've only been through Vegas on a Greyhound bus once. I tend to shy away from any tourist location now more than any city, actually. But
you'll find that most people in Vegas don't go anywhere near the Strip.
Right.
Kind of on the outskirts of town and kind of stick out here.
Yeah, I've heard there's beautiful skiing and there's wilderness around and all kinds of stuff. So yeah.
Lots of desert, lots of wildlife you can check out.
Great.
You just get 20 minutes out of town.
Yeah, man. All right. Well, if I'm out there, I'll definitely look you up. And let's be in touch. And I'll keep an eye on what you're doing. And whenever you have anything new you're putting out, just we'll have you on the podcast again. It'd be great to talk more.
Yeah, awesome. It's been a great conversation. Thanks for having me.
All right, man. Thank you, too. We'll talk to you again later.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Art of Not Giving a Fuck podcast. For more info, visit artofnotgivingaffuck.com or radicalandina.com.